less formal session than the other afternoon sessions have been, because the very nature of open problems is my word against yours, right? I mean, I can only try to convince you that these are the important and interesting open problems, but you may differ or you may have already chosen. So one of the questions I want to ask, which is why I want this to be slightly more of a discussion as well throughout. How many of you in this room, okay, some of you are already in a PhD program in psychology or neuropsychology, one of the allied disciplines. So but whether you are or not, how many of you feel like this is an area in which you want to understand the research problems? I mean, there's no point in me putting it up if it's a boring thing. Okay. So those of you who are not interested, you can look at your computer, whatever it is that you want to do. But let me start with saying there are two very different kinds of open problems. So especially if you are thinking of starting a PhD, or you're trying to just get into the field and you want some relatively straightforward thing to do, there is a range of problems that you can say you can start doing right away. So what I mean by immediate and short-term problems, they may not be easy. Let's say it may take you 5 years to address it as a PhD student, but it's a problem today, and the tools that we need to address them are also available today. You don't have to wait for 5 or 10 years to strategize so that the tools themselves become available in order for you to address the problems. So therefore start with those kinds of immediate term problems. Problems that, for example, if we create a vibrant community, you should be able to start addressing them starting today, and you can learn from your peers, you can learn from your teachers, you can learn from your students, and eventually start making progress on these questions, right? I have mentioned actually all of these in some form or the other. Let me put the three sort of buckets here. The first one is what I call cognitive geography. The second is what you might say is comparative computation. Okay, these are all terms that I'm making up. Don't assume that they just exist somewhere. The third is what I call rational embodiment. Right? So what do I mean by each one of these three, and why they have a fund of immediately available open problems. So cognitive geography we discussed a little bit in the morning session, where I said that in India, for example, the relationship between culture, geography and language is something that you can study, which is very hard to study from somewhere else. But the larger question of how does the study of the mind get affected by its cultural and social context is what I call cognitive geography, right? And India is particularly interesting because that geography changes a lot. So the fact that we have so many different groups of people in close proximity, but with different social, cultural, caste backgrounds, makes India a very good place to study how the interaction of society, culture, and cognition come together. Okay? So that's, yeah.
Just a question about the social aspect of applying the cognitive science. Sociology basically says that whatever we see around is a part of the larger spectrum of the whole. And of course, there is one field of sociology which says it can be reduced
So, okay, let's not worry about that larger question for now, meaning how in general society affects the individual is broadly speaking the topic of that cognitive geography issue, right? But because it's cognitive science, you're still primarily studying the individual, meaning I want to understand how my speaking Hindi is different from somebody who's from Eastern UP, let's say, right? But it's still really not aggregating. I'm still studying individuals and their cognitive capacities. But what's interesting, of course, is to ask, assuming that there is something which you can say is the social influence, and you may have to have ways of quantifying that and measuring it, but something as seemingly impervious to social influence, like perception. I mean, if you go back to the inverse optics idea of vision, well, if there's a cup in front of you, there's a cup in front of you. It should not matter whether you are, Hindu or Muslim or Indian or American or any of those things. So, if we find, for example, that there are deep influences of the culture on seemingly, non-social processes, just something almost as abstract as the geometric aspects of vision, that would be a very deep kind of influence. How society makes that influence, what aspects of society are influential, that's something that you will have to talk with a sociologist or a anthropologist. But I'm saying even before going in that direction, if it turns out that relatively deep aspects of language or vision or emotion, which seem private and individual, are actually social, that's a sort of a very dramatic kind of influence, right? So which goes into the project thing about are concepts fundamentally social. I mean, if in order for me to think what a cup is, or in order for me to see what a cup is, I actually already assume that there are other people who are also seeing cups or hearing or thinking of cups. That's actually a very dramatic shift. And India is a good place to study that. Yeah.
This is related query. See, all these social variables which you have talked about, communities, all of them decide what is an individual, in the sense of the sense individual. So when we are studying individual cognition, how do we differentiate what is individual about a cognition and what is social about it?
So what I'm saying is, for now, don't worry about that. Meaning, you can study that too. I mean, you can study what aspects of my being me or my identity. So, psychologists study identity, anthropologists study identity, sociologists study identity. You can ask what aspects of my identity are me and what aspects of my identity are something more collective, right? But what would be interesting is if you say something like caste. Now, caste is a social term and it's certainly something that I may believe myself to be in a certain way. I may also get that from society in a certain way. But if caste is something that makes me think about colors differently, so that is to say the way I conceive colors varies according to caste, that tells you that the influence of a variable like this sort of extends to something which is beyond its sort of usual sphere of significance. Right? That's the really challenging thing. It's not whether caste is individual or social, or whether other aspects, my personality is individual or social, but how do these seemingly identity or psychological traits aspect of my individuality affect other sensorial or cognitive aspects of my personality. I mean, that's what will really help us understand the influence of society on cognition. So if it turns out, again, very interesting work by Richard Nisbett. There's a book called Geography of Thought, which you should all read if you are interested in this topic. Lera Boroditsky and others that are showing that Mandarin speakers are not just seeing, it's not just social relations that are different. The way they perceive, so the figure-ground relationship, the standard Gestalt idea of the figure-ground relationship is, the figure is what you see and the ground is what you don't see. It turns out that East Asians actually see the ground much more than Westerners do, right? So it's not just a thing, they actually see the ground more than Westerners do. So, yeah.
Wouldn't it fall down to the usual trap of, say, reducing the social aspect to racial genetics and all those things?
Not really. Not really, because, it could, but it'll be hard to do. And I'm saying that those are worries that I don't have to think about. Meaning, if I can show that my cognition as an individual is affected by my social milieu, if anything, it's saying that we should understand genetics itself differently. Because epigenetics then becomes far more important than you thought it was. Okay. Yeah.
If I can give an example from that International Effective Picture System, there's a picture which is like around 1,000 which is rated, and they've given both arousal as well as valence in there. See, if you're looking at a symmetry at a death of someone, if it's just a symmetry, as a universal phenomena, all of us would feel it's a sad thing and all of us will have negative valence to it. But if you're from the background, so there are universal emotions attached to it, but then there are individual differences attached to it in terms of from which background or which cultural background you come from. For example, if I'm Christian and I'm looking at it, or if I've had a life event that is closer to it, in which I lost somebody. So it's much more intense and it's much more deeper to me than just the thing. So it depends from individual to society to culture.
Right. But I'm just saying, this is just a whole area. It may turn out in one case, it's not that important. It may turn out that, so we actually don't, see, India has so many variables that differentiate our society. That's one of its richnesses and also one of its unfortunate circumstances. Right?
Just pursue that a bit. See, so how I understand what is individual and social. What we share with all humans, we postulate as innate. What we share with a few groups, we say is cultural, and what I share with nobody is my individual things. If we define it in this fashion, then studying cognition of geometry will either be innate or it would belong to a social group. How would it belong to an individual?
So, of course, what is interesting is that the extreme just me end, because it's not systematic, is hard to theorize. Meaning, if I like dosas and you like idlis, there's simply nothing more to be said about it. But if it turns out that an entire group of people like dosas and another group likes idlis, then you might think, why is that happening? And if the whole world likes dosas and nobody likes idlis, then of course there is an evolutionary explanation for it, perhaps, right? But I'm just saying the interesting bridge areas are where what people used to think as universal are becoming cultural in your terminology, and what people think where cultural have many more biological influences than you think, right? So there's always this danger of it becoming a kind of sociobiology, but I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. But that's one area which I think you can immediately start working on. So if you know a language, if you have some access to a local culture, there are many questions that you can start asking about the cognitive variations that you see. To give you a simple example, it need not just be things like color and so on. It may even be reasoning. So your ultimatum tasks. Here's a basic kind of study that you could easily do, which is across India, to people, is there, if you take two castes, so if you take the ultimatum task being played by a member of caste A with a member of caste B, is there a systematic effect of that caste difference on how much money you are willing to accept? That's an example of a straightforward study you could do tomorrow. Okay? So that's what I'm saying, that once you realize that these things are there to be done, you can just go ahead and do it. The second is what I call comparative computation, meaning you take the whole computational neuroscience or cognitive science idea, but you start applying it to other species or within humans, problems that you didn't apply it to. So emotion is a good example. Of course it won't be easy to do. It's substantially maybe more technically difficult than just doing the study of caste influence on ultimatum games. But you can start posing these questions as to what is the computational capacity of emotion, like are emotions, so is anger, for example, computing something, and if so, what is it that it's computing? You can do the same thing for non-human species. So you can, for example, ask, is there a sense in which certainly bats, when they are using sonar to navigate the world, that can be described computationally in exactly the same way that we use light to navigate the world, right? So how far can you extend that? Can you, for example, what would be a theory of smell as opposed to a theory of vision or audition, which are still spatial? How can you start thinking about chemical signaling using computation rather than just visual or auditory signaling? Okay, so those are questions that all you would need to know is one organism well. So for example, if you want to study communication in crickets, so for example, Rohini's group here at ISC studies communication in crickets. But what can we do to bring this more systematic computational perspective to that particular problem? Right? They themselves don't necessarily, because as an ecologist, they're not necessarily asking the question in a computational framework. But that's the advantage. Right? So bring something new which other people have not done. And the third is what I call sort of rational embodiment, meaning it's not just the body, like everything can be explained using the body. Right? Maybe wrongly, maybe rightly, but you can apply embodied cognition to any question. But what rational embodiment would suggest is there are patterns to the way that the body enters into any particular domain, which is what Lakoff and others are emphasizing for language. They are saying our capacity for reasoning about social relations comes from preconceptual ideas about space. So how far can it go? Does space structure emotion as well? And not just how we talk about emotion, I'm saying actually experience emotion, which yesterday was mentioned that my experience of shame, not the way I talk about it, but my experience of shame is not affected by my spatiality. Oh, we don't know. Can we extend, therefore, the embodied hypothesis to, again, all these areas to which it has not been expanded to? Most importantly, to things which feel very non-spatial. Right? Because one of the dangers of the studies that we have seen is ultimately, again, because it draws from previous computational ideas about vision and language, it's still stuck in some of the same kinds of theories. So can we expand embodied cognition to show that body structures other things which are seemingly not embodied in the same way? So social relations again, right? What is the embodiment of social relations? Of course, this is a huge thing in anthropology and in sociology. So the question is, can we bring a cognitive perspective which is different from what anthropology and sociology are doing? So all of these you can start doing immediately. For example, religion is a sphere, almost, at least especially in India, the role of body in religious practices is extremely important. Almost every religion has specific kind of bodily rituals, whether it's caste marks or ways in which you decorate the body, how you perform on certain occasions, all of these things. So is there a embodied cognition take? So one possibility is, see, a great deal of current, if you look at the science versus religion debate, people who say that religion is wrong, broadly speaking, are people who say basically religious beliefs are either wrong, or even if they are not, they are either stories or they are wrong. And if they are wrong, they tend to be dogmatic and we hold onto them despite any evidence to the contrary. Right? So it's a very belief-based critique of religion. Even the cognitive science of religion, which I mentioned, is really a science of religious beliefs. Why do I believe in God? So if you look at Dan Dennett or others, sort of theories of why is it that religion evolved, it would typically be that it's for social bonding or for, it gives you comfort or various ideas, but it's a theory of religious beliefs. But actually again in India, religion is not so much a matter of belief as much as a ritual and bodily practice. So how can you therefore apply something like embodied cognition to studying religious practice? I mean, that's so, this is easily 2 or 3 theses right there. But I'm just saying you can do it tomorrow because all the phenomena are there. We see them in front of us every day. Partly it's just a matter of documenting them. Yeah.
Just to add to what you say, our experience of touch, for example, we were talking about emotions and
Yes.
and the recent interventions by Sankara and Guru on phenomenology of touch.
Yes.
And they try to connect it to untouchability.
Yes.
To class.
Yes.
This problem.
Yes.
Probably if we try to examine
Yes.
the relationship between touch as experience and
Yes.
touch as practice.
Yes.
that would be-
So, for example, instead of untouchability being seen as a kind of a formal social barrier, that is to say, there are certain people who you don't have any kind of discourse with, can we convert that into a far more embodied understanding of what constitutes the various practices of untouchability and what does that do to our social cognition of each other. I mean, this is a sort of very rich area of inquiry. Of course, it requires very different kinds of skills, right? You need the anthropological skills to go observe, collect the data. You need the cognitive science skill to know how to theorize these things. But it's a doable project. It's just a matter of somebody putting the effort to put this package together. Okay? So these are the 3 things, therefore, I feel are immediate, very rich sources of immediate, let's say, thesis projects or various kinds of research projects. You can start doing them tomorrow. Then I want to focus on things which I feel are not there yet. Like we will have to build this. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry about that. Why did you say rational embodiment? What is
When
that?
I say that it's not, so maybe structural embodiment was a better term, but what I mean is it's not, it's embodiment that comes in certain patterns. And it's as much the study of those patterns as it is of the body itself. So what I mean is like when Lakoff and others talk about the patterns through which metaphors of time, I mean time is structured by metaphors of space. That's it's not the body directly, it's actually how the body structures the other thing which is important. Right? So when I use metaphors of space to structure my understanding of time, or I use metaphors of temperature to structure my understanding of emotion, I'm not directly asking how emotion is embodied. I'm actually asking how another idea of the body, which is the spatial body, is structuring the landscape of emotions. So that's a slightly different, there's a more direct embodiment would be what enactive theories of perception would say, right? That to see something is to move your eyes this way, to be able to saccade and so, which is directly grounded in bodily actions. This is sort of still one step away from being directly grounded. It's not the body itself, it's how the body projects onto something else. Same thing with religion, when you think about it, it's how, so when we have murtis and other things in temples, that's not directly the human body, but you could argue that I mean, literally, at least in South India, the temples, the way they are made, I mean, there's the body of God, and within it is the, right, the murti. So that homology between the human body or aspects of the human body and various aspects of the mind or the external world, that's what I mean by rational body. Okay? And I think that is productive in this. It's sort of a way of keeping the computational idea of some rules or principles alive, but making it more fleshy rather than keeping it just as an abstract rule. Okay, so what do I think are, suppose that you are going to be a cognitive scientist or something like that for the next 50 years. What might be useful or maybe even very important trends? And going back to what I said, if cognitive science was to become, or something like the study of mind, brain, cognition, was to be a central intellectual discipline, right? That which was taught to everybody just like physics or maths is, right? So from 1st to 12th you study it, okay? If it was to become basic like that, what are the things that we would have to do to make it so basic? Well, one is what we saw in Professor Seshu's talk, which is the connection between large data computer science techniques and the study of the brain and the mind. It may be, so one aspect of it would be very, very large scale models of the brain. It's the obvious thing. So that actually almost comes in the immediate and short term problems. We can start doing that. The Big Brain Project is already doing it. And so groups across the world are beginning to develop very detailed models of the brain which require both fancy mathematics and very good simulations, and of course eventually the link with data. That's one thing, right? So the data intensive techniques, but equally importantly, you can imagine that it changes. So what was mentioned earlier about the link between the individual and the collective. I mean, right now we tend to divide these into binary categories. Either something is on the individual, or it's in the culture, or it's in the whole world, right? But once you start thinking about the world in terms of big data, it may not be necessary to make this distinction between the individual and the collective. To give you an example, suppose you take medicine. Now, right now we have this idea that more or less medicine is a universal, like modern Western medicine is universal. So if you have a fever, you take this medicine, and if you have a cough, you take that medicine. Broadly speaking, your individuality doesn't matter in any way. In fact, neither your cultural nor your individual variation is relevant to what medicine is prescribed to you. But obviously, as we learn more and more about biology, and at some point, let's say all of us have our genome sequenced, right? And so there is an individual profile of how you are, and the more we learn about how the statistics of the variation of your particular genetic and epigenetic inheritance interacts with general purpose stimuli, we would have much more personalized kind of medicine. Right? It's already, I mean, I would not prescribe something to you that I prescribe to the next person. So in the same way, we can imagine that something like grammar, it may turn out that there is something which is literally just my language and the way my mind works, which shares a lot with what people who are around me speak, which shares a lot with what people everywhere in the world speak. But there will be no longer any need. So what the cognitive geography is not necessary anymore, because basically what you'll be able to do is to map continuously the variation from something which is, because unlike atoms and electrons, absolute identity never happens in these things. There is always something which is unique to you. At the other end, there are always some things which almost don't vary across people. But we can map that into a continuum rather than have that be individual. So once we develop these tools, which will help us sort of put everything from individuals to collectives in a continuum, we will have probably a very different idea of the mind. Right? And we will be able to combine individual experience with very abstract collective capacities. So that I think will revolutionize this field, because essentially everything from newspapers to buying soap, everything in the mass market modern economy is driven by, we are all basically the same. But as manufacturing and other things change, it will both be opportunities to make money, to say that no, I'm going to get you something which is different from the next guy, plus also actually genuinely help you. So if you have, for education, you can imagine, like in health, it will revolutionize it. Because if I can create an educational paradigm or an educational stream that is just for you and nobody alone, because I have sort of engaged with those specific capacities, obviously it will be better than a one-size-fits-all education. Okay, so that's one big sort of long-term shift that I see coming up. The other one I have mentioned in great detail in the previous session, which is this movement away from sort of anthropocentrism in cognition, right? So systematic ways of getting into the minds of other species.
I kind of like your parallel between personalized medicine and education, but then this is just an opinion. Personalized medicine would be far more specific to a person than the pedagogy of education, because there would be much, I mean, that's again what I feel, would be much more overlapping between say the way you educate some person, X person, you have some pedagogy specific to X person and say person Y. That's because health and...
No, but think about it this way, right? I think what you're pointing to is that health is fundamentally driven by the needs of that individual. So you are, I mean, I can't treat, him if you are the one who is sick. But education is perhaps far more mandated by social needs than by individual needs. So society decrees that it needs lots and lots of literate factory workers, and so we create an industrial model of education. But maybe that will also change. Meaning, if we can learn how to accommodate these differences, and we get better and better at that, it may turn out to be
So we were overlooking at education until recently, when I say recently, until probably 2 centuries back, was very individual. The assembly line model of education was designed to the turn of the last century.
Right.
The classroom wasn't there before. So we have learned a lot of good things.
Yeah, but then the amount of say information to be learned and the amount of skills